Hello, and welcome to Your Corner of the World, a series of interviews on diverse topics presented by the Brown Arts Initiative. My name is Kate Kraczon, and I'm the new curator at the David Winton Bell Gallery at Brown University. I've invited Gabrielle Giattino, who founded Bureau Gallery a decade ago, to discuss how the COVID-19 crisis is affecting the small and mid-sized galleries in New York and beyond, and for viewers less familiar with the art world, to contextualize her gallery in the context of New York City and also the arts ecosystem internationally. Gabrielle is a native New Yorker. She received an MA from the Courtauld London and a BA from Haverford Bryn Mawr in art history. She worked for 5 years at the Swiss Institute as a curator and assistant to the artistic director, and went on to co-found a project space called Dispatch with curator, writer, musician Howie Chen. Many of the artists she now works with at Bureau initially had shows at Dispatch. Last week in my interview with Michelle Millar-Fisher, we shared our non-art jobs. Mine include music and bookstores, but especially food service and bartending, which allowed me to support myself during several years of unpaid internships at museums, exclusively museums. I continue to highlight this to emphasize how dependent all of our industries, whether the food and service industries or the art industries, are on one another. Gabrielle, you've had multiple jobs outside of the art industry, but your first job was actually in high school at the Met, right?
That is correct. Yeah, I would say the first job that I sort of count as a job was actually an internship at a high school internship at the Met. And I was placed in the visitor services department, which is essentially like front of house, right? So I was working at the information desk and selling tickets, and then we would get to sort of do programs and go into different departments, and I got to explore all of the like many layers that are underneath the museum. Like the museum goes underground like 5 floors at least, and there's all of the different like conservation departments, and it was just like such a dream, right? I mean, the Met, for a little girl growing up in New York City, like for everybody, but especially like the Met just holds such mystery, and it was so amazing to really get to know the museum so well. Like I could definitely still tour you around. I know how to get from one corner to the other without getting lost. So.
I know, I've been so many times and I still get lost constantly.
Huge.
But that's kind of the charm of encyclopedic museums, even
Totally.
though you grow up with. I'm better at the Carnegie Museum, which was my encyclopedic museum in Pittsburgh growing up, but still find myself turned around. I actually know the dinosaur section better than any, I think, at this point, having spent most of my time as a little girl there with my dad.
I don't know if I saw the dinosaurs at the Carnegie. I've only been once.
It's definitely been updated. They're plants painted on the wall. It's not just bones in a classical architectural space, but it still is a lot of the original exhibits that have been there for 20 and 30 years. And I'm sure you feel that way about the Met.
Yeah. I can say that I also, I share your experience of having had museum internships and having to work food service jobs to support myself. When I left the States after college, I went to London, and I had an internship at the Tate, essentially doing the same thing, like working at the information desk, because I was obviously, a pro at that. But yeah, I was unpaid, and so I worked in a pub on Portobello Road, which was like also like so
I'm sure
amazing.
Because that was the only way. It was so difficult, and still is so difficult to get working papers, right, in London.
Well, I got, after it was like a college, I don't know, that you could get like a 6-month work visa actually, but then I stayed for a few years and then went to the Courtauld and stuff like that. But I always loved working in restaurants, actually.
Me too. I feel like you meet and become very close, very intimate with your coworkers.
Yeah.
In a way that you don't in a lot of more like a less casual office environments.
Right. It's like you're going into battle with them every night,
Yes.
It's like if you don't work as like a functioning team, like the whole thing won't work. So it's probably like running special events or something at a museum,
Yeah.
I've run a few auctions, which was hell on earth, but yeah, you have to have like a huge team and you have to work together like really really seamlessly.
And I know that I asked you about working at the Met in high school. My first actual paid job would definitely be babysitting. Michelle mentioned that as one of hers. But so
Totally.
you got into art quite early. And I mentioned your education background already, but can you walk us through what brought you to the point of opening your own gallery, going from curator and art historian to someone who works quite closely and intimately with a group of artists for a long time to develop their careers?
Yeah. So, I mean, obviously, yeah, from high school, I was interested in the arts. And when I got to college, I think, yeah, I just was so excited that I could study art history. Like just the fact, it was so nerdy. Like I was just like, oh my God, I can study modern art. It was just like this, incredible moment. So I just sort of jumped in. And after London, I came back to New York, like right around the time of 9/11. And I was actually still working at the Met, just sort of like part-time, because they would just sort of, it was like a seasonal worker type thing. But anyway, took a while to find a job at that moment. And eventually, I think maybe 6 months in, I got an interview at the Swiss Institute. And I had tried so many different options. But anyway, I got a job at the Swiss Institute, and was just immediately like thrust into the contemporary art world in a way that I really, even though I lived in London, like I didn't really know that much about the contemporary art world. So it was like this crash course. And I think when I was there, I realized pretty quickly, as I said, like working for this director who was like, had a really intense vision, but wasn't like great at implementing things. Like I was the one like really working on all of the practicalities with the artists, and I was very organized. And I realized that the kind of what I could offer to the artists, to me, was like such a small thing, like just like organizing shipping or like whatever administrative things that I needed to do for them was so helpful, and I was met with such gratitude. And I realized like, oh, this is actually like an incredible asset, and artists have a lot of trouble doing this for themselves. And it's really just like a joy and so easy for me to like organize shows or, deal with production or shipping, logistics, like all of these things that go into making an exhibition or making a project happen for an artist. So I realized that was something I really liked. Anyway, so, 5 years later, I sort of reached the whatever glass ceiling, so to speak, at the Swiss Institute. And with this friend of mine, Howie Chen, who is a musician and a curator, he was working at the Whitney branch at Altria, which was, a little throwback there for you.
We're in our age with that.
Yeah. So Howie was similarly kind of like, yeah, like I'm done here. Like institutions, like I can't, like we both were just sort of like annoyed with our boards and like annoyed with, the powers that be, so to speak. And we were just like, let's just start something ourselves. Let's just do this ourselves. We know how to do everything at this point. And so we started I'm not going to say we were trying to invent a new model, but we're like, let's have like a curatorial space. It's kind of like an artist run space, but it's going to be like a project space. And we, like a friend of a friend, like had a tiny space in Chinatown that he was subletting, and we took it over, it was like $1,500 a month for a little storefront. It was like nothing.
Wow. I can't even imagine what that would be now.
Well, my friend still has it. It's not that much more expensive. It's a really tiny space, but it's one of those tiny, tiny storefronts. But anyway, so we started, working on projects. And I guess something that I realized working at the Swiss Institute was that there were certain artists that I really loved, and I wanted to figure out how to work longer term with them. And as we started doing the programming at Dispatch, I started realizing like, well, I would like to do a second show with this artist.
I'm having the same experience now that I switched to Brown. There are a handful of artists that I have such close relationships with and love their work and want to do another project with in the future. And it's a new context, new archives, new resources.
Yes.
So I'm excited to do that.
Right. And so I sort of realized, well, the only way as a curator of an institution that you can do a second show, I mean, unless, eons of time passes, yes, to leave and just go to a new institution. So I sort of took the other route, which is like, well, I think I'm going to start a gallery. And as I have, I think I said in my emails to you, like took some real soul searching, because I think when you go from the institute, like there's this, it's almost like,
you cross a bridge and you're told you can't come back to the nonprofit world. I mean, people are, we see, I mean, Eric Schreiner's at Pioneer Works now, and I think there are other great people who have gone back and forth, but I was told the exact same thing as a young curator, and understand that hesitation.
Yeah. But I think I realized that, from running Dispatch with Howie, and we had like a corporation, and we were like doing, we were running a business, right? Not a very successful business, but we were running a business. And I realized that I really liked that too. And something I think there was something about the efficacy of just like owning your space and just running it however you want. And you can run it into the ground if you want, or you can be really, prudent about it. And in a way, I mean, Dispatch was such a special time, but in a way we made a lot of our mistakes there. And I was able to then transition to the gallery kind of afresh, and not have to have my first business be the gallery.
Right, because so much of the most important skills I have as a curator, you can't read about, you have to actually experience and see. You have to fail, and you have to watch your colleagues encounter problems with their shows so that you understand how to navigate those situations in the future. It's so much on the job experience, which is why internships are so important, but the unpaid internship model is not sustainable. I'm totally not advocating for that at all, and I know you don't either. But it is amazing how in both gallery and nonprofit curatorial work, you have to learn.
Absolutely. Right. Which is, I've always been a little skeptical about the MA courses in curating, which are great, and there's great people that have come out of them. But it's like, it's not just about learning from books, or even learning to do a show in a kind of closed environment. Like, it's about the chaos and about I mean, that's definitely what I learned at the Swiss Institute. Like, I remember it was probably like 2002 or 3. We were doing a show with Olaf Breuning, who is an artist who shows the Metro Pictures. He was really big at that time, Swiss artist. And he came in for like one of our first meetings, and he was like, yeah, so we were sitting in the library at the time, and he's like, yeah, so I want to like tear down this bookshelf and like put a hole through the wall, and I want to close off the whole rest of the gallery, and you're gonna enter the show through this hole in the wall. And I was like, get a load of this. Yeah, right. And my boss was like, okay, yeah, we're gonna do that. And I was like, what the fuck? Like, are you fucking serious? Sorry, I don't know if there's language issues.
Everyone's a great teen at Brown.
Yeah. And it was like, learning to say yes was something that I definitely had to learn from my boss, Marc-Olivier Waller, who is a Swiss curator. Just the idea that, if you choose an artist and you believe in their work and you have the means to make something happen for them, you do it.
Right.
And there's a lot of trust there.
I had a similar experience, the same experience in my 20s, learning to say yes and to ask artists to think expansively and ambitiously, and then working with your colleagues and the budget and the artists to do what's actually physically and financially possible, but to start out thinking big.
Yeah. I mean, I have to say, I was also super lucky to work at a Swiss organization, right? Like, the budget, it wasn't a huge budget, but we were able to really do crazy stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I knew about it. It was one of the, like, definitely handful of institutions coming out of college when I graduated in 2002 that I knew about and thought was really cool. So I love that I was looking at what you were doing.
Yeah, it was fun. I mean, I will say, I probably worked with like 3 female artists my entire tenure. You know, it was definitely a skewed vision. But no, I met a lot of great people and learned so much. But yeah.
So you mentioned September 11th, which I graduated in 2002, so a year after that happened, and it had a similar, I mean, we're in an unprecedented situation, but a similar effect in terms of a devastating shutdown of the New York art world and a lot of the country. And the financial impacts of that, I won't say which institution, but I was at a museum and arrived as a curatorial intern, and there were no curators. The department had just been eliminated. It was a small department, and it actually allowed me to get experience that I wouldn't have had otherwise. And then at another position I had, I'm trying to make everything anonymous, it was similar in that there were no support staff. It was me doing multiple jobs. So I learned a full spectrum of how a curatorial department, a larger curatorial department would work, and gained experience that my title didn't indicate. So the reason I say this is that for young students and graduate, students who are nervous about 4 years from now, or even who are graduating this coming month, there are also opportunities, because if you're scrappy and if you're flexible, to not take advantage, because that sounds exploitative, but to gain experience that you wouldn't otherwise have as someone who's entry level or even interning at organizations. And it's a really there are opportunities that happen in crisis to develop skills that you will use later on, or to maybe advance your experience in a way that you didn't anticipate in the first couple of years out of college.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's weird.
Go ahead.
Oh, it's so hard for me to like really remember what the city, what the city was like. Those months around September 11th. It's hard I know people are trying to like compare what's happening now, and it's like, I don't recall. It certainly obviously was not this severe. I remember being really scared and like super anxious, but it wasn't shut down for that long.
Do you recall going through the 2008 recession and how galleries, artists, and art workers in general navigated that crisis?
So I had just started Dispatch at that time. So we always sort of joked that we just started at the bottom. So we didn't really have to like experience a crash, because I left the Swiss Institute in 2007. We started Dispatch in 2007. So it was like, I remember hearing from friends that, it was like the tap was just turned off. Like nobody was buying anything. So I've definitely like asked some of my friends who worked in galleries at the time what to expect now. But I didn't have that experience exactly, because we were just like super scrappy, just like didn't know how to sell art even, so we learned that as we went. So we did really start at the bottom, which was lucky. Yeah.
And how has the art world changed since opening the gallery? And how have you adjusted to these changes? I think I even mentioned in the email art fairs and the importance of art fairs growing over the last decade to the financial well-being of most galleries.
Yeah. I mean, the art world has just gotten so much bigger and just so much more global. Obviously, the internet has impacted it hugely. I mean, for me, art fairs were how I learned to sell art, because when you're a curator running like a kind of arcane program, people aren't like looking to buy from you. They don't even really know that they can buy from you. And then we started getting invited, maybe 2008, 2009, getting invited as like special guests to some of these fairs. And then once you're in that environment, people know things are for sale, because you're at an art fair. So in a way it was just like, you know, you're just like thrown into the deep end of the pool, and then you're just like sink or swim. And I was able to sell art, and I just sort of learned how to do it. It's not like rocket science, you know? So in a way, like fairs were really, really helpful for me. And I think are helpful for a lot of small galleries to just like meet clients. And then like, you know, you have to make these connections in order, you have to have these relationships with buyers in order to maintain your business. But yeah, at this point, the fair cycle is just like, it's just punishing.
Yeah,
So,
and in heels a lot.
yes. Tell me about it. It's the only time I wear heels. It's the only time.
Yeah. Which gallerist said that like you need 4-inch heels to sell the most expensive art?
You and I have height on our side though.
Yeah, that's true.
We are both tall.
Yeah.
But yeah, for sure. I definitely have a lot of colleagues who own a lot of heels for this. It helps with confidence, you know. It's difficult to be a woman in the art world, and like having that little extra dose of confidence helps. But yeah, I mean, I'm sure, you know, there's definitely a feeling like there's almost like a relief that maybe all the fairs are not going to survive this, like this crisis. It's not sustainable,
right.
Particularly for small galleries and younger galleries, which are never the ones who are making profits
Right.
from fairs. Like
Right.
they're breaking even if they're lucky. And the young galleries are brought in to introduce exciting new programming. They're put through the ringer in terms of their applications for all these fairs, because it's like, you know, it's got to be a specific project, it's got to be new, it's got to be a discovery, you know, which is a very difficult thing to save at this point because of the internet. Like, how are you gonna, and just because of the pace of the art world at this point. But yeah, like, so the young galleries are expected to like bring this excitement and like flavor to a fair, and then, you know, if half of them break even, you know, it's a good result. You know, it's really not sustainable.
Or galleries that are being asked to show in a project space setting where it's one singular installation that is not necessarily something that's easy to sell.
Oh, totally.
To pay these fees to be in a booth and to not be able to show multiple discrete objects that are more likely to sell to collectors.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, the galleries who are in like the main sections that have the bigger booths have the higher costs, but yeah, they can change out their booth every day.
Yeah.
They can bring secondary market work if they want to. They can change it out, you know. So it's just, it's a lot of pressure.
Right. And as a curator, I'm often alarmed when I speak with collectors, whether they're board members or just, you know, friends who go to a lot of art fairs, that's their snapshot of what's happening in the art world, to the point where I've had, you know, donors say, well, no one's making video art anymore in the last 5 years because it's not as lucrative to bring video work to your booth at an art fair. And it pulls, it's not tastemaking, but it pulls an understanding of what is actually happening in artist studios away from institutions and small spaces like yours who are actually in those studios working with artists, to just a market-driven way of understanding what is being made right now. That, I mean, this has been written about and people have been talking about this for a while, but I just want to point it out for people listening who maybe don't know that going to Frieze I think Frieze is a great fair, as they go, is not, you know, it doesn't provide a full spectrum of what's happening in terms of practice. Certainly it's object-based.
No, right, because I mean, at the end of the day, galleries are businesses.
Exactly.
So and the way that we program over a year, let's say, is, you know, you have to offset risk with something that you think is maybe more of a known seller. So that's how you build a program as a gallery over the years. So you can set in like a number of risks, which could be video or like a really complicated sculptural installation, performance. you can't have a program that's just all of those things as a gallery if you don't have something that you think is going to sell. Exactly. So yeah, so you build your program like that. But when you have a fair, like it just, I mean, for someone who's been in the business for 10 years, like I don't feel like that's where I want to take my risk. You know, if I'm going to pay like between $10,000 and $40,000 for a booth, like I'm going to try to, you know, make some money. And it's really difficult to, you know, even have enough inventory to break even at those kind of costs when you have a gallery which, you know, if most of your artists are whose prices are, you know, under $50,000 a piece, like well under that, you know, it's just very difficult. You do the math, like it's just very, very difficult. So yeah, I think, I mean, I personally, fairs are like the last place I want to look at art. But
there's still an important place for galleries to make money. And so I'm not completely not just outside of my orbit of.
Yeah. Just from a personal, like I just don't have the attention span. Like I would, but I'm also, you know, I'm in New York City. Like I would of course rather walk around the Lower East Side or Chelsea or Tribeca or wherever, or go to a museum than go to a fair. But I, I live in the center.
That's a really good point. So when I do go, I try to see galleries in Europe that I don't get to
right.
ever, if not infrequently. And it's always nice to connect with people in person too. So it becomes you see other curators, you see colleagues in galleries and a lot of artists. So there's a good side to it too.
Oh, absolutely. I can say it may be my least favorite way to look at art, but it's one of my favorite ways to see colleagues. I mean, I have some of my very closest colleagues, you know, I asked you if your last name was Polish. I have like one of my best gallery friends is Gallery Stereo in Warsaw. Like I love their program. I love every single artist they work with. I love them so much. And yeah, we met at Lista, you know, probably 8 years ago, in Basel. And we just really liked what each other was doing and just became friends. And now we collaborate a lot. And so, yeah, of course, like going to a fair or a city where we'll both be is, you know, it creates that opportunity to reconnect.
Yeah. And the fairs also create an opportunity for you to introduce more emerging artists to collectors and curators and colleagues at other galleries and institutions. So maybe explain to us how a gallery nurtures an artist and creates opportunities for them, especially as their career expands, and especially small and mid-sized galleries. Because I think a lot of people outside our field don't understand that there's a huge range in terms of gallery size and budget and staff and resources.
Yeah. I mean, my gallery, let's see, we have 19 artists, which is a lot now, but you know, we've been at this for a while now. And I have 2 full-time staff members. So it's a tiny team. But you know, the artist and gallerist relationship is a very close one. I mean, there's a lot of logistics and pragmatic, you know, problem solving. There's a lot of, you know, kind of like studio visits and critiquing. There's, you know, social work type stuff, you know, just like being a therapist and just being there and listening. It's just like a lot of attention to each artist. So there's a real kind of like nurturing relationship that the gallery provides. And structure for the career. So helping the artist navigate requests for shows. Like I've been in the business for a long time. Like I know who's trustworthy, who's not. I know potential pitfalls. Trying to help an artist figure out how many things to say yes to, and like explaining that it's okay to sometimes say no when there's too much on your plate, or just an opportunity that's just going to be a waste of time, you know? So, and then in terms of what we do on our side, I mean, it's about outreach and knowing your curators who are your friends and your colleagues, and doing outreach and introducing the work to new people, knowing your clients, knowing what their tastes are. So if there's a new artist you're starting to work with, to introduce that work. And so that's almost more of like an educational side to it. But it does feel like the gallery in a way is like the fulcrum, right? You have like the talent on one side, which I feel like really, it needs to be nurtured and protected. Some artists are okay meeting the curators and the collectors. I mean, most of them are okay meeting curators, but sometimes you need to kind of keep them separate. Some collectors are not the chillest people, and I feel like that's sort of like my pill to swallow. Like that's my job. Like I will deal with these people for my artists. Like I'm almost like a barricade or something. Like I want to protect them in a way so that they can produce and like feel nurtured and safe to experiment in their studios, and not feel the need to just fulfill market demand or not be able to experiment. So yeah, that's a bit of what I do. Yeah. I think, when you get to a bigger gallery, for sure, there are some amazing gallerists who work at the bigger galleries. They're, at that level, you have salespeople and you have artist liaisons. So you're separating that fulcrum. Like there's people on either side, the ones that just deal with the clients and the ones that just deal with the artists. But I think, as you say, like, as you said about like your early experience working in institutions where there wasn't a huge team, you wind up being able to do everything. Like a smaller gallery, everybody in my team knows everything that's going on every day. Maybe I know more intimately what's going on with the artists, but everybody knows, like everybody's like on the same page and we're all working together. So I think, there's a real benefit to having a small, nimble institution or gallery. And maybe it means like we'll be able to survive this crisis in a way that the bigger galleries won't. I'm not sure.
Yeah, one of the reasons that I came to Brown was because the Bell had a smaller scale than the ICA at Penn, where I was for 11 years. And I learned so much at ICA, and previously the MCA Chicago, which was an even bigger standalone institution, not affiliated with the university. And I really loved the idea that it was going to be a smaller group of people on building a program, and ICA tripled in size while I was there. And I actually didn't like my experience of being siloed and not knowing what was happening across the entire institution. It was part of the job to just go with it. And it gave me a lot of time to do my work, but I still loved those early years where, the staff would just share what they were working on every week at a staff meeting. And I knew what was happening across the institution, and I missed that. So I wanted to come to the Bell and have that experience again, I guess relive my late 20s. But I wanted to say, you and I are going to be working together because you represent Harry Goldharvey IV, who is supposed to have a show of both, individual works, but also collaborative works with the artist Faith Wilding, who is also based in Rhode Island. It was supposed to open in June, but it's pushed forward. There's no reason at this point that we don't see it opening, hopefully this year. That would be amazing. But you and I met, actually. I feel like we'd met previously, but we really met when you and Harry and I sat down and talked about what was possible and saw the Bell space. And I think it's a great example of how nurturing a gallerist can be, because I don't know how long you've represented Harry, but this is still an early stage of their career.
That's right. Yeah. Yeah, I was introduced to Harry's work by Weston Lowe, who's our associate director at the gallery, who's much younger than me, is very connected with a group of younger artists, and Harry had a show at a space in Brooklyn called Motel. And Weston was really excited about it. And he was like, you know, you should really see this work. And I saw the images and I was like really, you know, glued. And I was like, oh yeah, I have to see this work. And I went and saw the show and I was really floored. Something that I've been kind of transitioning back to over the past, I would say 2 years, has been like starting to work again with younger artists in a way. Like there's almost like two waves of, or two generations in my gallery, like the ones that really came up with me from the beginning, and then a new group of young artists who are not my generation. And it's been interesting to like work with an artist in their early career, though I'm not in my early career.
Isn't that strange when that starts?
It is strange. But I realized how much I love it. And something that I'm personally really drawn to is just seeing a young artist that has this imperative to make. Like there's no question that Harry, whether there's an opportunity to show or not, like Harry is just has to make this work. Like it's just coming out of him. It's an obsession, and I'm always drawn to that, where it's like not an artist who's making for a show. It's just like whether or not there's eyes on it, the work is being made. And I was just so convinced immediately by Harry's work. I got so excited and started following it. And I think I met Harry at the show at Alyssa Davis Gallery. And I was sort of nervous to meet them. And, but immediately it was just like, you know, I mean,
and that's so important.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
I've been very lucky that, but also by design, I've worked with artists that I've just absolutely loved spending time with.
Yeah.
Occasionally, you know, things get tense as budgets change, or, you know, part of curating and also probably being an artist gallerist is you say no to things too. That's a big part of curating. But I had the same experience with Harry. Just falling in love with the work, but also really loving spending time with the person.
Yeah.
And I was introduced to their work by Dan Fuller, who's an incredible curator, who I always listen when Dan tells me to check out an artist. He is one of those curators who sees as much art as possible, and it does not need to be at the coolest or hippest institutions. He will go anywhere and across the country. And so I believed him when he told me that I had to connect with Harry in Rhode Island as soon as I landed. And Harry and I went on one of those 8-hour, and then Brittany, their wife, joined 8-hour road trip through Rhode Island. And Rhode Island, you can drive across in an hour. So it's windy, but they showed me where they grew up and their schools and the landscape and there's a branch of their family that's been in Rhode Island for 400 years. So they are the fourth. So that kind of, that experience of seeing the landscape through someone who grew up with that footprint, that family history and footprint, was one of my first weeks in Rhode Island. It was an unforgettable experience. And then I knew about the work visually through images, but actually seeing the work in person at Bureau, it blew me away.
Yeah. I mean, Harry's work is incredible. It is so tight. I mean, he took me on one of those tours as well around Rhode Island when I went, I don't know, maybe a year ago. But yeah, you see how much the work is just so tied with the landscape and the history. And even though there's this kind of occult, mystical side to the work, it's so tethered to the earth. Like it's so just growing out of all of the references. And it's interesting because Harry's self-taught, but like so well self-taught, like so informed.
Yeah, talking to Harry's like you assume they went to, an MFA program.
Yeah. But yeah, very excited for that show. we don't put dates on things at this point. So
yeah. The show that will happen with Faith Wilding. And I think that's another lovely story, just to kind of demystify how all of us come to the decisions we make about exhibitions. So we were in the gallery talking to Harry, and, you know, I asked Harry if there's an artist in Rhode Island that they can see themselves collaborating with. And I knew Faith was in Providence before I got here and was excited to do studio visits and get to know her better. But as soon as Harry said Faith Wilding is someone I admire, I met briefly, but I really admire her and would love to work with her. And now they're on the phone every couple of days and in each other's studios. And what was initially going to be a project with 2 artists is now 2 artists plus some work that is a lot collaborative.
Yeah.
We'll get to see, because unfortunately no studio visits during the lockdown, but I'm so excited to get back to Rhode Island and get in both of their studios and see what they've been working on. And that was in conversation with you. That was, you know, you knowing Harry better than I did, knowing if that was possible and if that would be a good collaboration. So that was important that you were part of that conversation.
I take very little credit for that. I will give it all to Harry, to be honest. But yeah, probably giving him the confidence to suggest it was probably my help. Yeah.
And then when we'll be working together, because again, to the nuts and bolts of galleries and museums and nonprofits, when I need a really good image of one of Harry's work, I'll ask the gallery, or when I need object information, which includes the materials that the work is made out of. That's why it's so nice. I work with a lot of artists that don't have galleries. That's something that I do pride myself on, but it is so luxurious to work with a gallery who can send you the information you need, who's triple checked it, and you can just plug it into the press release or the catalog or whatever you need. And that there's that way you're not also bothering the artist in the studio constantly poking for these little, you know, dates and what type of wood the frame is made out of. So it's important. It's one of the many important parts of a relationship with a gallery when you work on an artist show. Totally.
Yeah, I think the logistics is a really big part of what we all do. And it's not the most glamorous side of our jobs, but it's so important. We maintain a huge archive, an archive for each of our artists of, you know, every work they've ever made, where it's been shown, if it's changed, if there's a bibliography attached to it, you know, just trying to like really have these complete archives when possible. So it's a big job.
It is. Everyone thinks that I rediscovered Ree Morton because of the retrospective I did in 2018 that's still traveling and hopefully will reopen at the ICA LA. But the hardest part, the actual archival work where you develop a checklist of everything that she's ever made, what still exists, what it's made out of, where it's stored, that was done previously by both the estate and by Sabine Foley for 2 shows that she did in Europe. And I think the heavy lifting made as challenging as a large exhibition like that is, I think reduced the labor by 50 to 75%, the fact that was completely done before I dove in. I wasn't in a warehouse or storage facility going through boxes of random stuff like people had been the decade before. Right. So I try to point that out.
Yeah. Well, that's something definitely, you know, you asked how the art world has changed. Like I only saw like the very tail end of like transparencies and slides and things like that. But like I can't imagine doing what we do, just
writing
on the phone and with faxes.
Yeah, the official letters, the number of emails that we send now compared to the communication before computers is, you go into archives and it's amazing. The shows happened with 20 exchanges.
Right.
So I also wanted to ask you what's happening on the ground now in New York City and elsewhere as midsize and small galleries, especially, are impacted by the crisis. You developed a change.org petition and are organizing with fellow gallerists and around rent, mortgage, and utility relief, for example. And yesterday was the start of a Cancel the Rent campaign that I participated in as well, because this needs to happen across the country. People are unable to pay their rent either for their storefronts or for their personal living spaces. And I cannot believe that we're in the second month of this and people are expected to pay rent on May 1st. On May 1st, especially, like,
I know.
May Day.
I know May Day hasn't been huge in this country yet, but I think, I don't know, this might be the year. It's been a real like learning experience in a way, just like figuring out how to connect, especially at a time when you can't go out and have a meeting, like figuring out, okay, there's clearly tons of organizations that are already working on this. But yeah, just figuring out how to effectively, lobby our elected officials and raise awareness around the absurdity of forcing businesses to shutter, but still requiring them to pay rent. And it's not to say that it should be the landlord's responsibility. There's been some pushback. I mean, I haven't had any direct pushback on any of my posts, but I know some people have. But, the bills that we're trying, and specifically in New York State, the bills that are like, not even on the table, but that have been proposed, have concessions for landlords and mortgage holders. And it's really just trying to get relief to the small businesses. I mean, we're lucky that we do a fair amount of business online. So I've been able to make some sales. But, rent in New York is no joke, Yeah.
And I think the statistic you shared is half of employed people in New York work for small businesses.
I think that's right. Yeah. I think we're certainly in New York City, like really scared for what will become of the city if the lockdown continues and places just start having to really close. I mean, no one's going to be able to take over those leases. Right. Aside from the big corporations. So exactly. It's like, is it going to just be like Whole Foods and Apple and Starbucks? That's not the reason why people, artists come to New York City. Right. So it's really just this huge push amongst gallerists and small businesses across the city to try to really push. And so, yeah, there's a huge rent strike, and I think nationwide for May 1st. But also just really pushing at all of our elected officials to support rent relief.
Exactly. Everyone needs to call their senators and state representatives.
Yeah.
I'm almost daily. I mean, I've been getting recordings, but they're not full.
Right.
Their machines aren't full, so someone's checking and hopefully gathering and not just deleting. I actually did reach someone in Rhode Island, which is a much smaller state, just over 1 million people, but someone in the governor's office about this. So you can actually talk to someone, and they were really friendly and receptive, that I called and told me to tell people that they are recording how many people call about rent relief and mortgage relief, because I don't want a world where it is just corporations in New York and elsewhere, in Providence and small towns across the country, where it really will just be Walmart if small businesses close, who don't have access to the PPP loans or just aren't able to create enough capital to reopen.
Right.
So I think that this is something that everyone, however much time you have, I know a lot of people are doing the job of teaching their children, child raising, and their full-time jobs online. But if you have a moment, I think all of us should be calling daily whenever we have 5 minutes, and call our representatives and really push for this. And if you have the privilege of withholding rent, you should. But I also understand and have friends who are building credit and not in a position to affect their futures by, going to battle with their landlords. So I think anyone who falls within the spectrum of supporting this, even if you pay your rent and just call every day, you're doing something to help.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, and I want to add that it's not just small galleries and mid-sized galleries, but and you were generously given space on David Zwirner's platform for a really fantastic show. I actually don't know how to pronounce the artist's name, but I really love his work.
Brandon Nadife. Nadife.
Yeah, it's a pretty incredible collection of images, and
Yes.
I'm glad that you were selected.
I was too. I was very grateful.
Selected to use Zwirner's platform, but Gagosian has one of the largest, probably, right? The largest gallery in the world, a gallery system, has furloughed part-time staffers, and the remaining staff is taking pay cuts. So it's affecting billion-dollar galleries as well. This is, it's just like the education system in this country. It's going to affect Brown just as it affects small community colleges and small private universities. So I think, especially the businesses that sustain the communities around those colleges and universities. So again, I just want to ask anyone watching to please connect with your representatives to help us in this organized movement.
I second that. Yeah.
So we can end there, or I can ask, like, what strategies are there to move forward that you see? So after we reopen, how can people watching support you and other arts workers in this movement? I said movement.
This movement.
That's my new.
Yeah, I mean, I think certainly raising awareness about the like sort of razor sharp margins that we all operate on, and I think that's probably true for a David Zwirner. I don't know what Gagosian's margins are like, but there is this. The optics of the art world are that it's so glitzy and sort of superfluous, but the reality is that most of the people that work in the art world and the artists who are a part of it are pretty scrappy and are really scraping by. It's incredibly difficult to make a living as an artist or an art worker. Mm-hmm. And yeah, I mean, I don't know what the prescription is, but for sure, raising awareness right now about like what our cities and towns will look like without relief. I mean, we don't want to get into like what direction of this country is going in, but it's pretty scary. And I think having spaces that encourage critical thinking and freedom of speech and creativity are really, it's vital and important. I have a feeling the art world will shrink a fair amount, and I don't really know what that means. I mean, I think it had felt a bit inflated, but I also don't, I don't want my colleagues to close, so it's hard to say. I think there's been a lot of awareness around how all of our institutions are funded, and there's a lot of work to be done. There's a lot of talk about where the money comes from that our funders who keep our museums running. Like it's just, there is a real inequity in our businesses, and I think this is a moment where we can take some time to reflect on not just how to preserve what we love in the art world broadly, but how to make it better when we come back. And that's something that I think just talking with, local activists on the Lower East Side who have for years been talking about how, new businesses are displacing immigrant-run businesses, and how the city council deals with rezoning our neighborhoods, things that, we haven't necessarily needed to focus on, but right now when rent is affecting all of us, and it's really a moment when we can sort of seize the opportunity to think about how it could be better in the future, not just the same as before, because it won't be.
I think that's a perfect place to end. I completely agree with you, and thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for including me in this program. I'm looking forward to working together.